All right. Well, now we're going to talk a little bit about political parties. And again, we get the same symbolism over and over, and they're always button heads. But in this particular lecture, we're going to talk a little bit about political parties. So, first of all, we got to understand is what is a party. Okay, so as you can see, a political party is a group of persons who seek to control government by winning elections and holding office. And so, you got to think in terms of you just can't run a government by yourself. You got to have a group of allies that are going to work with you to help you solve problems. And that's really what political parties are. It's their sole, one of their sole, that doesn't sound right either. One of their important functions is to have an organized, like administration to be able to run a government. We also see like in the United States, the two major political parties are, of course, the Republican and the Democrat. And if you remember, we have Republicans are conservative. And think real quick, what are some of the ways you can kind of identify a Republican? And one of them might be they tend to live in the suburbs. They tend to live in rural areas or like in the country. Democrats tend to live more in cities, and I notice I'm saying tend. And the idea here is you don't fit necessarily in either one, but there are certain characteristics. Men tend to vote Republican. Minorities tend to vote Democratic. Women tend to vote Democratic. Um, Older people tend to vote Republican. Um, People who belong to unions tend to be Democrats. People who tend to run businesses tend to be Republicans. So there's really a lot of different reasons, somebody may vote one or the other. Um, One thing we notice here with the parties, though, they can be one of three things. They can be principle oriented or about their principles, which would be like conservative values or liberal ideas, right? It could also be issue oriented, and maybe that might mean the party is very determined to uh, make some changes with climate change, or maybe it's pro business. So that would be an issue oriented, and then or taxes. And then election oriented. We tend to be more election oriented because if you win, you get control of the money. One of the things I tell my students all the time is if you don't know the answer, it usually will come back to money somehow. Now, you might have to be a little creative in how you make that connection, but it usually does come back. So if you win an election, then you get control of how our basic coffers, our money is spent. Now, what can parties do? Okay, so there's really five things, and there's a couple of others, but what do parties essentially do? One, they nominate candidates, right? So we know in Marion County that Republicans, Democrats, and actually Libertarians is a third party. They nominate candidates, and then we as voters have a chance to choose from that list of candidates. Parties also inform and activate supporters. You'll probably get flyers and stuff in the mail, or maybe you've donated to one candidate or one campaign over another, and you'll start to get messages from the party about, hey, here's a fundraiser we're doing. Here's something, we're trying to raise awareness to this issue. It also acts as a bonding agent, and really, people want to belong to or with people who think and act kind of like themselves. I mean, people are generally attracted to people that they understand and can understand their values. That's not saying we don't have friends who are absolutely this or absolutely that. That's completely different than the way you like to do things. But generally, we like people who are similar to us. Parties, probably their most important function is to govern. Members of a government act according to their partisanship, meaning what sort of party that they're in, and or affirm allegiance to a party. So even within a party, you can be much more conservative. So there are conservatives within the conservative party. There's liberal conservatives as well. The last thing a party does is act as a watchdog. Parties that are out of power keep a close eye on the actions of the party in power. So right now, the Democrats have the presidential, hold the executive branch. So the Republicans, anytime Obama sneezes, the Republicans are right there to point out how he could sneeze better, how he could sneeze more quietly, how you get the idea. Vice versa, the Republicans control the legislative branch. They're in the majority both in the House and in the Senate. And so the Democrats, they're there nitpicking and identifying all the issues or things that the Republicans are doing wrong. So both parties do it to each other. So why a two-party system? And kind of what, first of all, we have based upon tradition, this historical basis, right? The first two parties were the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Now, we didn't really get into these two groups. They weren't parties per se. They were actually, if we go back to this, they were kind of bonding agents. This was the Federalists were people who felt very strongly that there should be a strong national government, whereas Anti-Federalists believed more in the power of the states. And so these two parties kind of developed on their own, not any real formal organization. Like you said, there's this force of tradition. We've always had a two-party system. We've had some minor parties that have made a difference a little bit, but no minor party candidate has ever won. Probably the most successful was, well, there's three up top of my head, but Teddy Roosevelt ran in the Bull Moose Party in like 1913 or something, and only had like 15% of the vote. So it's significant in that it takes away votes from major party candidates, but it doesn't have enough power to actually secure it on its own. The next one is the electoral system. We basically created a system that ensures that there's going to be two parties. And I always like to look at it like, if you're a member of a club, you don't want to have wide open club membership rules. You want to kind of make sure that only a certain person or a certain people you can identify with have access to that club. And the two parties, like Republicans and Democrats, do not want third parties to be included like in our electoral system. So just kind of keep that in mind. And then we also have, a two-party system. It's very easy with this kind of consensus along ideologies, where on the right you have conservatives and on the left you have liberals. On the right you have Republicans and on the left you have Democrats. And so, the reality is we don't have like mid parties. We don't have social conservatives. They're kind of incorporated within the bigger party. What are we missing, I guess? Well, one, it would be to just look at what are the systems like that have multi-parties. And so, when you look at a multi-party, like Israel has 47 different parties. And you could have anywhere from about 4 to 8 parties participating in government. You think, well, isn't that a good thing? You get a lot of different thoughts and a lot of different opinions. But the reality is the more cooks in the kitchen, the weaker the brew, or I don't even know that saying. But the point is like you want to have this ideological cohesion. Now, there are some positives, though. The multi-party system, it provides broader representation of people. Right? Israel, 47 different parties that represent some sort of ideological strand. They tend to be a lot more responsive to the people. If you've ever tried to get actively involved in one of our two, they're kind of huge, lumbering, beasts. They're not real agile. And then multi-party systems give voters, a lot more choice. But with that, we have these disadvantages. Whoops, went too far. So they cause parties to form coalitions which can dissolve easily. A coalition is where a group of like parties would come together and say, okay, we agree to kind of rule together, but any sort of real disagreement in that coalition could fall apart because one party then will pull out of the government. And that's what happens in Israel a lot. It happens in Japan a lot. Japan's had something like 60 governments in 65 years. So that's one thing that's, our system is very stable. So, yeah. Now, what does a one-party system look like? Well, a one-party system is one where there may be one party. There may be some variety in the lower edges of the party, or lower levels of the party. But the reality is, in a one-party system, let's say the Chinese Communist Party in China. So there's a lot of candidates at the lower level. There's not so many at the top. But everybody belongs to the Chinese Communist Party. One system where only one party is allowed. And I have on here dictatorships such as Stalinist Russia or any of the other dictatorships. Even Iraq, when Saddam Hussein was president, the Ba'ath Party was the only party. There's also these modified one-party system where one party generally or regularly wins. The thing about American politics is about every 16 years or so, we switch to the other party as a nation because we just kind of get, I don't know, maybe there's party fatigue. Who knows? So party membership patterns. So, why might you join one party over another? And you can see all these. If you've grown up in a family that's one way, or you achieve a certain economic status. Because remember, if you're a conservative, you're pretty happy with how you've made money, so you don't really want to be, you don't want to change a lot. Your age. A lot of young people are in the Democratic Party. That's not saying all young people are there. Religion. If you're Catholic, you traditionally used to be Democrat, but now the Catholics are kind of, changing sides. Jews tend to be Jewish. Buddhists and Asians tend to be Democratic. So, you get the idea. I say that a lot, apparently. So our nation's first parties, we've already kind of talked about them, and I'll just kind of run through this. I won't even say anything. You just basically, if you remember, it's all about, it's all about federalists were pro-national strong government. Anti-federalists were about the states. The anti-federalists essentially represented the commoner, whereas the federalists represented the upper class. Now, so you can get kind of an understanding there. If we look at the minor parties, there's a couple of different ways that minor parties come about, whether they believe in something in particular, whether it's about economic protests like the Tea Partiers earlier in the century. We have splinter parties where you've had a part of the party break off and start a new party. We don't really get that in the United States. And then there's single issue, like the Green Party is all about the environment. So they do struggle in getting a wide range of voter support. So why are minor parties important? Because they play a couple of key roles here. First, they play a spoiler role. I've already talked a little bit about Teddy Roosevelt, and when he ran for president for a third term, he started his own party, the Bull Moose Party. The minor parties often act as critics, but we don't really get this in the American system as much, just because our minor parties are so weak. The Libertarians have had chances to step up, and they just haven't done it. And there's also they're important because they're innovators. Usually, if we go back this one page, that's going forward. If we go back to one page here, come on, buddy. Usually because they're smaller, they can kind of change the fundamentals of kind of an idea. So it's just kind of important to kind of be aware that they do hold some. Come on, buddy. Apparently I gotta wait. Okay. So parties are generally decentralized, and why would that be? Because if you think of the Republicans, who's the leaders of the Republicans right now? There is not one leader of the Republican Party. In the Democratic side, there is Barack Obama, but on the Republican side, they don't have one. So usually the winner of the presidential election kind of becomes the de facto leader of the party, but it's very decentralized. There's a lot of power out in the states. There's a lot of power, nationally, statewide, and local. As far as the national party machinery, the national parties, they hold conventions. They have chair people who try to organize things. They have a committee that tries to help him or her. Campaign committees. So there's a lot of help nationally. At the state and local level, it's a little bit more complex. I'll skip because I'm running out of time here as always. But at the local level, it's usually by wards or congressional district wards, precincts. So you probably vote at the local firehouse or something. So there's three components of a party, and again, I seem to talk too long. But